Man is condemned to be free because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. This insight from Sartre reveals something most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid: the overwhelming reality that every moment of your existence is a choice you're making, and there's no one else to blame for where you end up. I used to think I was trapped by my circumstances, my upbringing, my job, my relationships. It felt comforting to believe that external forces were controlling my life because it meant I wasn't responsible for my dissatisfaction. Then I encountered Sartre's philosophy of radical freedom, and it shattered this comfortable illusion in the most disturbing way possible. Have you ever noticed how we desperately search for reasons why we can't do something we actually don't want to do? What if our sense of being trapped is actually our way of avoiding the terrifying recognition that we're choosing our limitations every single day? Sartre discovered that freedom isn't the liberation we imagine it to be. It's the heaviest burden human consciousness can bear. And understanding this changes everything about how you see your life, your choices, and your constant attempts to escape responsibility. The Great Escape Artist. We've become masterful escape artists, but we're not escaping from prisons. We're escaping from freedom itself. Watch how people talk about their lives. I have to work this job. I can't leave this relationship. I'm stuck in this situation. Every day, millions of people construct elaborate stories about why they have no choice, why circumstances control them, why change is impossible. Have you ever caught yourself saying, "I have to," when you really mean, "I choose to," because the alternative feels scarier? The psychological comfort of victimhood has reached epidemic proportions. We've created entire industries around convincing people they're powerless, self-help gurus who promise external solutions, therapy that focuses on past trauma as permanent limitation, political movements that reduce individuals to their group identities and circumstances. Nothing says personal empowerment like a $2,000 course teaching you that all your problems are caused by other people's energy. The beautiful irony of the victimhood industry: Step 1, realize you're powerless. Step 2, buy our solution to feel powerful again. Consider how dating apps have become the perfect metaphor for manufactured helplessness. People spend hours swiping, complaining about the algorithm, the shallow culture, the impossible standards, all while refusing to acknowledge they're choosing to participate in a system they claim to hate. It's easier to blame the app than to face the freedom to delete it and meet people differently. What might your frustration with the dating scene be protecting you from seeing about your own avoidance of genuine vulnerability? Social media provides the ultimate freedom avoidance mechanism. We scroll endlessly, claiming we're staying informed or connecting with others, while actually avoiding the anxiety-inducing awareness that we could be using this time to create, build, or change our lives in meaningful ways. The algorithm becomes our excuse. It's designed to be addictive, rather than acknowledging our participation in our own distraction. Fascinating how we'll research which meditation app to download for 30 minutes, but won't sit in silence for 3 minutes. Peak optimization culture. Turning the avoidance of presence into a productivity hack. This is what Sartre called bad faith, the psychological mechanism we use to deny our radical freedom by pretending we're determined by forces beyond our control. Isn't it remarkable how sophisticated our reasons have become for avoiding the choices we don't want to make? Sartre's radical discovery. Sartre made a discovery that most people find so disturbing they'll do anything to avoid its implications. You are radically, absolutely, terrifyingly free in every moment of your existence. This isn't the feel-good freedom of motivational posters. This is existential freedom, the recognition that in every situation, no matter how constrained it appears, you're making choices about how to respond, what to value, who to become. Even in a prison cell, Sartre argued, you're free to choose your attitude, your resistance, your meaning-making about the experience. Your mind operates like a sophisticated choice-hiding machine, constantly generating reasons why your options are limited, why circumstances control you, why you're not responsible for your situation. But Sartre saw through this psychological sleight of hand. Have you ever noticed how we can spot other people's self-imposed limitations clearly while remaining blind to our own? Think about your morning routine. You tell yourself you have to check your phone, you need that coffee, you must rush through breakfast. But Sartre would point out that each of these is a choice. You're selecting your relationship to time, to stimulation, to nourishment, to presence. The anxiety you feel about slowing down reveals your freedom to choose differently. Your friend who can't leave their toxic job because of money, you see their fear of uncertainty. Your family member who has to stay in an unfulfilling relationship because of convenience, you recognize their avoidance of difficult conversations. But when it comes to your own life, suddenly all the limitations feel real and immutable. This psychological projector runs constantly, casting your inner avoidance of freedom onto external circumstances. You see obstacles everywhere because recognizing your freedom to choose differently would require taking responsibility for your current situation. What if the people who trigger you most are simply reflecting back the choices you're afraid to make? But here's what's really fascinating. Sartre understood that we don't just have freedom, we are freedom. Human consciousness is nothing but the capacity to transcend whatever situation we find ourselves in through the choices we make about how to relate to it. This sounds empowering until you realize what it actually means, which leads to something even more disturbing about the nature of choice itself. The unbearable lightness of choice. When you truly grasp Sartre's insight about radical freedom, you discover why most people unconsciously work so hard to avoid it. Because freedom without predetermined essence or purpose is absolutely terrifying. Sartre's famous declaration that existence precedes essence means you exist first, then create who you are through your choices. There's no predetermined nature, no essential self waiting to be discovered, no cosmic plan that determines your path. You're thrown into existence and must create your own meaning, values, and identity through the accumulation of your choices. Have you ever noticed how choosing becomes more difficult as your options increase? That's not just decision fatigue. It's the psychological weight of recognizing that with more choices comes more responsibility for the outcomes. This creates what Sartre called anguish, not anxiety about specific threats, but the vertigo-inducing recognition of your radical responsibility for who you become. Every choice you make defines not just what you do, but who you are. And there's no authority, religious, cultural, or natural, that can make these choices for you. Your psychological projector generates endless distractions from this recognition. You focus on what others are doing wrong, what systems need changing, what circumstances are limiting you, anything to avoid sitting with the overwhelming responsibility of your own choices. Consider how people approach career decisions. They research salaries, company cultures, growth opportunities, work-life balance, all important factors. But notice how rarely they ask, what kind of person do I choose to become through this work? That question reveals the existential dimension that most career advice carefully avoids. What might your endless research and planning be protecting you from recognizing about your fear of committing to becoming someone specific? Dating provides another perfect example. People create elaborate lists of desired traits, swipe through profiles, analyze compatibility metrics, all while avoiding the fundamental question, who do I choose to be in relationship? The focus on finding the right person obscures the more unsettling truth that you create who you are as a partner through how you choose to show up. We've turned finding ourselves into a consumer activity, as if the real you is hiding behind the right combination of personality tests, life coaches, and spiritual practices. The beautiful absurdity, spending thousands of dollars to discover that you're the person making the choice to spend thousands of dollars. This leads to what Sartre observed as a central paradox. The more aware you become of your freedom, the heavier the burden of choice becomes. Most personal development culture promises that awareness will feel empowering, but Sartre's brutal honesty reveals why authentic freedom often feels crushing rather than liberating. But here's where Sartre's insights become truly transformative for anyone willing to embrace their implications. Advanced applications: the psychology of authentic choice. Understanding Sartre's framework enables you to recognize the sophisticated ways you avoid responsibility and develop the capacity for authentic choice-making if you're willing to tolerate the discomfort this awareness creates. The first step involves developing what I call choice consciousness, the ability to recognize decision points that you've been treating as inevitable circumstances. Your psychological projector works overtime to hide these choice points from your awareness. Have you ever caught yourself feeling trapped in a situation while simultaneously making dozens of small choices that maintain that exact situation? When you feel frustrated with your living situation, your mind immediately generates reasons why moving is impossible: money, timing, relationships, logistics. But examining this through Sartre's lens reveals the hidden choice. You're prioritizing security and convenience over the uncertainty and effort that change would require. The advanced technique involves asking not, "What should I do?" but, "Who do I choose to become through this decision?" This shifts focus from external outcomes to existential responsibility. For example, when facing conflict in relationships, most people focus on who's right, what the other person should change, or how to avoid difficult conversations. But applying Sartre's framework means asking, who do I choose to be in this conflict? Do I choose to be someone who avoids difficult truths for comfort, or someone who risks discomfort for authenticity? What's fascinating is that your most authentic moments often feel simultaneously empowering and terrifying. That's the existential signature of genuine choice-making. The psychological projector creates what I call outcome obsession, focusing entirely on results while avoiding responsibility for the choosing process itself. But you can only control your choices, not their outcomes. The freedom lies in how fully you own your decision-making process. This applies to creative work in profound ways. Most people focus on whether their art, writing, or projects will be successful, appreciated, or profitable. This outcome focus creates paralysis because you can't control external reception. But you can choose to be someone who creates authentically, who risks vulnerability, who commits fully to the process, regardless of outcomes. Isn't it interesting how we'll spend more time choosing a Netflix show than examining who we're choosing to become through our daily habits? Career transitions provide another testing ground for authentic choice. The conventional approach involves analyzing market conditions, skill transferability, financial implications. But Sartre's framework adds the existential dimension. Who do I choose to become through this work? What values do I choose to embody through how I spend my time and energy? But here's what most people miss about applying these insights. Your resistance to making certain choices often reveals your deepest values. What you're unwilling to risk losing shows you what you've chosen to prioritize. Your refusal to leave comfortable situations reveals your choice to value security over growth. Your avoidance of difficult conversations reveals your choice to prioritize harmony over authenticity. This recognition leads to something even more profound about how individual choice-making affects every system you're part of. The systematic impact of radical responsibility. When you begin operating from Sartre's understanding of radical freedom, It transforms every relationship and system you're part of, often in ways that make others deeply uncomfortable. Your family dynamics shift dramatically when you stop participating in the collective illusion that personalities are fixed, that's just how things are, that change is impossible. When you start taking full responsibility for your responses, your boundaries, your choices about engagement, other family members often react with confusion or hostility because you're no longer playing the predetermined role they've assigned you. Have you ever noticed how people often get uncomfortable when you stop participating in collective blame and complaint? That discomfort reveals how much our social connections depend on shared avoidance of responsibility. This creates what I call responsibility contagion. When one person starts operating from authentic choice, it makes everyone else's avoidance of responsibility more visible and uncomfortable. Your refusal to participate in complaint sessions, your ownership of your reactions, your focus on what you can control rather than what others should change, forces everyone around you to confront their own freedom. The psychological projector at the collective level works to maintain systems where everyone can avoid full responsibility. Workplaces develop cultures of blame and external focus. Political movements organize around shared victimhood and external enemies. Social groups bond through complaining about circumstances none of them are taking responsibility to change. Modern social media has perfected the art of collective responsibility avoidance. Infinite content to consume, endless people to judge, constant validation that your problems are caused by forces beyond your control. It's like a 24/7 support group for people who want to feel better without changing anything. But when you operate from Sartre's understanding, you become what I call a choice catalyst, someone whose commitment to authentic responsibility reveals the possibilities that others are avoiding. This isn't comfortable for anyone involved. Your romantic relationships undergo seismic shifts when you stop trying to change your partner and start taking full responsibility for who you choose to be in the relationship. Most relationship problems center on mutual attempts to avoid the responsibility of authentic choice. Partners focus on what the other person should change rather than who they choose to be, regardless of their partner's choices. What might your desire to fix your partner be protecting you from seeing about your own avoidance of becoming the person you want to be in relationship? When you apply Sartre's framework to parenting, it transforms from a control-based model to a responsibility modeling approach. Instead of trying to determine who your children become, you focus on who you choose to be as a parent. This creates space for them to develop their own authentic relationship with choice and responsibility. At the societal level, Sartre's insights reveal why political and cultural movements that promise external solutions to internal problems always fail to create lasting change. Real transformation requires individuals taking radical responsibility for their choices, their responses, their contribution to collective problems. This doesn't mean ignoring systemic issues or structural problems. It means recognizing that your response to these conditions is always a choice, and that choice defines who you become. But what most people find even more challenging is what Sartre's philosophy reveals about the relationship between freedom and limitations themselves. The counterintuitive truth about freedom and limitations. Here's what most people misunderstand about Sartre's philosophy. Recognizing your radical freedom doesn't eliminate limitations. It reveals that your relationship to limitations is always a choice. The popular misinterpretation of existential freedom suggests that acknowledging your choices means you can do anything, overcome any obstacle, transcend any circumstance through willpower. This magical thinking misses Sartre's more sophisticated insight. You're free to choose how you relate to the constraints and limitations that define your situation. You can't choose your genetics, your family of origin, your historical moment, your socio-economic starting point. But you are radically free to choose what these limitations mean to you, how they define your possibilities, what story you tell about their impact on your life. Have you ever noticed how two people facing similar limitations can create completely different lives based on their chosen relationship to those constraints? Consider physical disabilities or chronic illnesses. The limitation is real. Certain activities or experiences may be genuinely impossible. But the meaning of these limitations, their impact on identity and possibility, the role they play in defining purpose and values, all of this is chosen through how you relate to the constraint. The psychological projector works over time to obscure this distinction between circumstances and your response to circumstances. It creates the illusion that limitations determine possibilities, when actually your chosen relationship to limitations determines your possibilities. This applies profoundly to financial circumstances. Having limited money is a constraint that affects your options. But whether you choose to relate to this limitation with shame, resentment, victimhood, creative challenge, or motivation for change, this relationship defines who you become and what becomes possible. The self-help industry has convinced us that freedom means having no problems, no constraints, no difficult emotions. Meanwhile, the wealthiest, most free people often report the highest levels of anxiety and depression. Turns out unlimited options without internal direction is its own kind of prison. The counterintuitive insight is that accepting limitations fully often creates more freedom than denying them. When you stop wasting energy fighting against unchangeable constraints, you can focus your choice-making power on what you can actually influence. Most therapy and personal development approaches promise to eliminate psychological limitations, anxiety, depression, trauma responses, difficult emotions. But Sartre's framework suggests a different approach. Choosing how to relate to these aspects of your psychological reality in ways that align with your authentic values. What if your most challenging emotions are actually information about values and choices you haven't fully acknowledged? Your psychological projector creates the fantasy that freedom means having no constraints, no difficulties, no obstacles. But authentic freedom means choosing who you become through how you engage with inevitable constraints. This reveals why people who seem to have unlimited external freedom, wealth, options, flexibility, often experience the most anxiety and depression. Without external constraints to focus on, they're forced to confront the terrifying weight of pure choice, the responsibility of creating meaning without predetermined guidelines. But even understanding all of this doesn't eliminate the fundamental challenge of living with radical freedom. The honest reckoning. After years of trying to apply Sartre's insights about radical freedom, I have to acknowledge the brutal truth. This understanding doesn't make life easier, solve the fundamental anxiety of human existence, or guarantee that you'll make better choices. Living with full awareness of your radical freedom is genuinely exhausting. Every day involves countless choices about who to become, what to value, how to respond. The psychological relief of believing you're trapped, controlled, or determined by external forces is real and understandable. I still catch myself creating elaborate stories about why I can't make certain changes, why circumstances control my options, why other people or systems are responsible for my dissatisfaction. The psychological projector runs constantly, and even understanding its operation doesn't eliminate its influence. Have you ever noticed how the people who seem most comfortable with their choices often seem to have done the least examination of whether those choices reflect their authentic values? The promise of existential philosophy, that understanding your freedom will lead to authentic living and meaningful choices, oversimplifies the complexity of actually implementing radical responsibility in daily life. Sometimes you'll choose security over authenticity, comfort over growth, familiar patterns over scary unknowns. And that's a choice too. What might be most valuable about Sartre's insights isn't the elimination of anxiety or the achievement of perfect authentic living. It's the recognition that the weight you feel isn't evidence that you're doing something wrong. It's evidence that you're human, facing the fundamental challenge of consciousness itself. The goal isn't to eliminate the anxiety of choice or to achieve perfect freedom. The goal is to develop enough tolerance for uncertainty and responsibility that you can make choices that align with who you actually want to become, rather than who you think you're supposed to be. This means accepting that you'll never have enough information to make perfect choices, that every decision involves trade-offs and losses, that taking responsibility for your life doesn't guarantee that life will feel better or easier. But there's something profoundly meaningful about owning your choices fully, even when they don't work out as planned. There's a dignity in acknowledging your role in creating your experience, even when that experience includes struggle and limitation. What Sartre offers isn't a solution to the human condition. It's a framework for facing that condition with honesty and courage. The freedom he describes isn't comfortable or empowering in the conventional sense. It's the terrifying and magnificent burden of being conscious in a universe that doesn't provide predetermined meaning. Your choices define who you are. Your responses to limitations reveal your character. Your relationship to uncertainty shapes your possibilities. This recognition won't make you happy, but it might make you free, in the most challenging and authentic sense of that word. The question isn't whether you're free to choose. Sartre's insight reveals that you can't escape choice-making even if you try. The question is whether you'll develop the courage to own your choices fully, to accept responsibility for who you're becoming, to face the anxiety-inducing recognition that your life is the accumulated result of decisions you've made about how to be human. That's the real trap of freedom. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you accept it, you can never again convince yourself that someone else is responsible for who you choose to become. If this exploration of radical freedom has created any recognition moments about your own choice-making patterns, I'd be curious to hear which insights resonated most deeply with you in the comments below. Sometimes the choices we're most afraid to acknowledge are exactly the ones pointing toward our most authentic path forward. And if you're interested in continuing to explore how philosophical insights can illuminate the psychology of modern life, consider subscribing to Keys to the Psyche, where we examine the timeless wisdom that helps make sense of contemporary human experience.